Now, the next thing I want to talk about very briefly is not so much a person, but people in general, and that's the Black agriculturer. So this conversation, I think, comes twofold. You can look at it in the history and then you can look at it in the present. In terms of the history of it all, I think what's really overlooked in terms of the Black community's contributions to food culture is growing food. So it's very well known and documented that when slaves were brought over from Africa, that they were not eating. They were dying from not being used to the food that was available to them. They weren't getting nourishment from the food that was being available to them. And so as a means of bluntly, a way to stop their slaves from dying, they had to figure out a way to feed them food that they wanted to eat. African meals were based off of things like, beans and couscous and legumes and rice, cabbage, things of this nature. And these weren't available in America. So they actually had to take crop from Africa, bring them to America. The African slaves then were cropping and harvesting all this food because Americans didn't know how to. And not only did this allow them to survive in terms of having food available to them, but this also created a whole entire industry of agriculture. But then not only were they harvesting and farming the lands, but then they were also being the purveyors, so they were selling it. So, but for having the Black community being a part of agriculture, arguably you would not have the rich foods and soils that we have right now. You wouldn't have the rich agricultural system that we have. And arguably the whole market of agriculture would look vastly, vastly different without the African influence. And now when I talk about, Black food, it's not just African I'm discussing. I'm talking about, yes, there's the African influences, of tubers and grains and kale and couscous and legumes and all of that. But then you also have the Caribbean influences that really start to bring in a lot of seafood, so saltfish, conch, the tropical fruits, pineapples and papayas and guava, and rice and bean dishes. These all start to come together when you start to have slaves from the different parts of Africa and the Caribbean now coming to America to be met with this now French cuisine that's been brought in from the 1800s from chefs like Hemmings, who have passed on these ways and techniques of cooking to other slaves. So it's this whole fusion again that you see of food and ingredients that was made possible by agriculturists. If it was not for these Black farmers bringing over crops, harvesting them, making them viable here, and then available to the communities at large, where would our food be today? Like no rice, no beans, no papayas and guavas and pineapple. Like, can you imagine eating without it? I can't. Outside of looking at the agriculture of the past, I think that what needs to be considered is agriculture of now. And talking about, who's farming our lands now? Does the Black community have access to farms now? And if they do, where? How? I think it's really important to bring attention to the people that are growing food, because, we talk about who's cooking the food, we talk about who's serving the food, we're talking about people writing about the food and creating recipes, but who's making all of it? And I think that is something that needs to be talked about, is Black agriculturists and how they have heavily influenced the way that we know and get to enjoy food today.